when you start, it's kind of like a little bit of chaos because we had like 38. I think there's 38 teams there, all barking, rearing to go, and screaming, and it's just hard to control all that energy until it's time for you to go. So it's like you're trying to you want to hook up at the last possible minute, but you can't be late either. So you try to time that perfectly. I always tend on erring on the side of being too early and being too late. So my dogs were kind of jumping at the line and getting crazy and getting tangled up, and all my friends and family had to try to like fix the tangles and everything. But finally it was my turn to start, and we went up to the start line, and it was pretty cool. Like, freaking A, man, we made it. Like, people that run the Iditarod often told me like the hardest part of the Iditarod is just getting to the start line, because so much can happen, you know, from the time you start training in September till the time March rolls around. It's Iditarod time, and when we finally were there, like, well, we made it through supposedly the hardest part. So I guess it only goes up from here. And when it's my turn to start, we took off running, and the first leg of the trail, the way I planned on doing it was breaking it up into shorter runs first and taking shorter rests. So the first checkpoint is a place called Yetna Station. There's a little roadhouse off the Yetna River, and I was planning on stopping there 35 miles into the race for about 3 hours. And we took off going, and it was Bonnie was my leader, and Danny took over Clyde's spot for the lead dogs. And we took off running, and it was fine the first half of that leg because it was through the trees, and that's what we're used to running on. Like, we don't have big rivers up where I live, and it's all like overland trails through the woods, and that's what we had the first, 20 miles of the leg or 15 miles of the leg. And then it puts you out onto the Yetna River, and the Yetna River is a pretty big river, and there's snow machine tracks going off the main track every which way. And Bonnie, never being in a situation that way before, kind of got ADD and didn't know which trail to take and was like going off this way. And Danny knew what I wanted him to do because I would keep yelling, G, stay right, stay right. And Danny knew what he wanted to do, but Bonnie, he wasn't like self-assured enough that he would fix Bonnie. Bonnie kept pulling him off to the wrong trail, and he would just go with whatever way Bonnie was going. So it was one spot early on in the race where like we would go way off to the river this way, and then we'd come way back this way, and I've gotten a couple tangles because like we were just going in the wrong area, and people were watching me, and I was like, oh, this is kind of embarrassing. We're kind of a soup sandwich right now. So like, Bonnie, you're fired. I fired Bonnie, put Buttercup up in front, then so it was Buttercup and Danny, and that fixed the situation for a little bit. But
is not to interrupt, is there any understanding from them, like moving them around? Does it fuck with them a little bit? Like, now they were in this spot and now they're not, especially going from lead to not in the lead and vice versa?
I think they're early on in the race, like I think Bonnie wanted to be in lead. Like, she has that like
drive.
Yeah, like I'm the leader kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
I am the captain now.
I'm the captain now. So maybe she was a little bit bummed, but it didn't really. She still did great. Like, she moved her back. She still pulled and worked hard, but then Buttercup kept getting confused, and Danny just wasn't like confident enough to take over the lead position. So I fired Buttercup and put Maverick up there with Danny, and Maverick is a real good G haul. Like, I tell him to go G in an open space, he's going to go just to the right. And say ha, he's going to the left, and that fixed the problem. So we kept going. Finally made it to Yetna, and got the dogs bedded down. Rested for 3.5 hours. Yetna, there's a roadhouse there. They have hot water inside for the dog food, so I didn't have to actually get my cooker out, and they have spaghetti and meatballs in there for the mushers. So I filled up a plate of spaghetti and meatballs and chowed down, got the dogs fed, and I didn't rest at all. Got the dogs up 3.5 hours later, bootied, took off to the next one. And about halfway, this was another 30-mile run. So we're breaking up. Like, 30-mile runs are really easy for the dogs. Like, it's not that big of a run. And instead of doing like a 50 or 60-mile run and resting 6 hours, I thought it would be better to do 30-mile run 3 hours, and it just is harder on me then because like I'm not getting any rest versus 6 hour. I could probably get 2 or 3 hours of rest. But we kept going to Squentna, so take you off the Yetna River, you get on the Squentna River, and then it was a lot easier traveling. Maverick and Danny were doing great, and about maybe an hour away from getting into Squentna, I noticed just a slight change in Trinket's gait. just a slight change. So I stopped the team, went up and did a range of motion test on her. And it was something from her front end, but couldn't pinpoint anything. And sometimes the dogs are just so stoic and tough that it's hard to pinpoint any injury on them.
You just tell it's way too late.
Yep. And but also, if you can't pinpoint an injury, it also could be a sign of a myopathy or rhabdo building up into the dog. So we get to Squentna, and I have the vet check her out. Like, I can't really find anything wrong with her. And I knew the next leg going from Squentna to Finger Lake, I believe, was going to be a rough trail, real wind blown and punchy. And so I decided to drop her just out of caution. And I think I would have had to bag her, which would have created more of a hassle for me.
What does that mean?
Beggar. That means if a dog starts limping, you put them in the bag, sled bag, so that you're not making a hurt dog run. You put the hurt dog in the sled bag, and they can ride the rest of the way. Then,
if there's like a full blown emergency, like when you're in between, like, are you on sat phone? Is there any cell phone coverage? Like, how are you mitigating that or preparing for it?
There's what I carry. So on your sled, there's a GPS beacon, so you can with an SOS button on it if you need it. And then I carry a Garmin InReach, so I can send text via sat with that. But I don't have a phone. There's no service out there really, so you're kind of GPS sat thing, and then if you hit the SOS button on your sled, then
and the cavalry's coming.
The cavalry's coming, yeah. So don't hit that button unless you absolutely need it.
Sorry about that. That was a mistake. Dog
Wrong
stepped
button.
on it. All right. So sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Squentna, I dropped Trinket, so I was down to 15 dogs now. Got some good rest in Squentna. I think I slept for like maybe 30 minutes. Also wasn't that tired because it was just starting the race and everything. And then the next leg heading to Finger Lake, I think that was actually everything written down. I think, let me see here. Yeah, Finger Lake was 42 miles away after Squentna. And so that was a real rough trail because things were wind blown over. So it's real windy in this section, and it doesn't get traveled a whole lot. So as teams go through the trail with not a whole lot of travel and new fresh snow keeps getting blown over it, it's almost like the dogs that go through it, instead of packing it down, it's almost like an egg beater goes in there and churns it all up. So now instead of having a hard packed trail, you're going through like sand, soft sand kind of thing, and it's just hard work for the dogs. Instead of moving on a hard, fast trail at 9-10 miles an hour, you're moving at like 6-7 miles an hour, and dogs are working harder. And it's a put out then for the musher because you have to like kick and ski pole, and you're helping the dogs any which way you can. But eventually we made it into Finger Lake, and it started snowing then pretty good when we got there. And actually Sebastian, the guy that was Brock's original owner and the owner of he was the checkpoint manager at that checkpoint. So I got to catch up with him, and we BS for a little bit when I probably should have been sleeping, but I was up chit-chatting our way and didn't get any real sleep there. And I think we were there for about 5 hours. And then we went on to Rainy Pass, which was the next checkpoint. And this was the first, leaving Rainy Pass, or leaving Finger Lakes, you go through a section called the Steps, the Happy River Steps. And these are a section of steep drops followed by like 180-degree turns, real sharp turns. And there's been a lot of teams out there that ruin sleds and hurt themselves on that section of trail. It's a pretty technical section. And but because we were getting so much snow, everything was cushioned. So like we just softly cruised through those things with no problem at all. And we got into Rainy Pass and after Finger Lake, and everyone was asking how the steps were, and like, oh, dude, it was cake. It was easy. There was no problem. I got through them. I was like, was that it, or is it still ahead of me? And it was no big deal. It was kind of cool. And once we got into Rainy Pass, that's whenever I realized, like, okay, I'm getting way too tired. I need to really dial in my checkpoint routine to get me more time that I can be out on my own. So we were in Rainy Pass. I was in Rainy Pass for 6 hours, and I think I slept 2. So I'm at 2.5 hours of sleep. And then from Rainy Pass, when you leave Rainy Pass, like you start climbing up, like you're in the Alaska range, like the Denali mountain range, and you start climbing up mountains, and you find yourselves traversing through the alpine. You see climbing alpine lakes, and you're surrounded by these giant freaking mountains on every which way you look. And it was some of the most beautiful country I've ever been in. You're essentially like running through Denali Park with a team of dogs. It's pretty freaking cool. And you keep climbing, and then all of a sudden you come to a place called the Dalzal Gorge. It's a big gorge that's just like a straight drop with some sharp turns around trees and boulders, and you really got to move your sled and drive your sled, else you're going to run right into a tree or right into a boulder. And actually, there's been, like, if someone's going to get hurt, that's where it usually is, if it's not the steps. Yeah. And it's been several mushers have broken sleds and broken themselves in that section too. Yeah. Probably more people in the Dalzal Gorge than in the steps. But I freaking white knuckled that thing down into the steps, and as you drop down, it spits you out onto a river, and the river's windblown, and it's just like straight up glare ice. So it's just a sheet of ice, and the ice was like this blue ice, and you're traveling around on the ice, and you're surrounded by these giant mountains. It was pretty freaking magical. And we finally keep going, and it takes you out to an overland trail once you get off the river, and you're in a checkpoint, a real remote checkpoint called Roan. And I was there for about 4 hours, and when you leave Roan, it takes that you're essentially going to be out of the Alaska range, and now you're in the interior of Alaska. I think like a few decades ago, in past it, it's called Farewell, in the Farewell area. There's a wildfire came through and burnt down all the trees there. And when all the vegetation is burned out of there, there's nothing for snow to grab a hold of. So when winds come through there, it blows all the snow out. So there was a section of, we left Roan, there was like a section of 20 to 30 mile stretch of no snow. Wow. We were running on just dirt, rocks, boulders, logs, like all on the trail.
And super hard because it's cold as fuck.
Super hard, yeah. Yep. And so like the thing that happens with that is on the runners, there's plastics that help glide, that for different temperatures, you put different types of plastics on to help glide better in different snow conditions and different temperatures and everything. And just from running over the dirt and everything, it chewed up my runner plastics. And by the time I got into the next checkpoint, which was Nikolai, like I was almost on my bare aluminum on my runners, which it could have snapped. Like you're running the risk of snapping. If I'd have broken a runner, I would have been in a freaking tight spot. I would have had to borrow another sled from somebody or figure out a way to MacGyver that thing back on. But I ended up breaking the run to Nikolai. I think it was about, I think that was like a 90-mile run, and I broke that up. It was a 75-mile run. I broke up into 2 runs. I did a camp out in the middle of the trail there. So I found a spot right in the trail that was off the trail enough that we could take a 3-4 hour rest. Oh, wow. And so we rested there right along the trail, and that's where I just slept right in a straw. Yeah. Just laid down with the dogs, grabbed 1 or 2 of them, bear hugged them, keep our body heat together. And
do you get the impression that they enjoy that? Yeah. Like if they're sleeping with dad, it's a pretty fucking special gig.
Yep.
Yeah. And real quick, the straw, I assume, are you recycling that? Are you?
No.
Really?
Nope.
So you just leave it there?
I just leave it there,
okay, so you got to bring a lot of it with you.
Each checkpoint has a bale straw. So checkpoints, you don't have to stay in the checkpoints. They're more like resupply points. Okay. So you have different bags. I usually have 2 or 3 bags at each checkpoint with gear and stuff that I need to grab. And so when you get to a checkpoint, if you can go through a checkpoint, you just grab what you need and keep on going, and you can camp out in the trail then. Yeah. So that's what we did, and then we left Roan, and we camped in an area that had a little bit more snow. So once you get 30 miles out of Roan, you start getting back into the snow. And then this was when the sleep deprivation really started hitting me for the first time. So
how many days in is this?
Oh man, that's a good question.
4 or 5? I
think it's 3. Okay. 3. I think it's 3.
Yeah.
And by this point, I think I had 2.5 hours of sleep maybe. And the run to Nikolai, it's the first native checkpoint on the trail, and it was a pretty tough run. We left, and as you climb up a little bit, some hills, and then you drop back down, you climb up some more hills, and eventually we traveled through some marshes and muskegs, and then we went through a birch forest, and I saw a sign that said Nikolai 20 miles. I'm like, oh, we're getting pretty close. That's 2-3 hours away. And then it was dark now, and late at night, and I started catching myself nodding off, dozing off, and I was trying to stay awake with any which way I could. And then eventually I just remember all of a sudden waking up oh damn it, how long was I out for? looked at my watch, like my GPS quit working for some reason. I don't know if it got cold and shut off. I had no idea how far I've been going. And I was like, I don't know. I guess we're just gonna keep going. And then
so dogs were just on autopilot.
Dogs were just they were just driving. And I was being a turd in the back sleeping.